Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the weekly MMA Cycles Market Update. This is Gianni DePoci, your host, and I'm joined by another very special guest this week. We're getting very lucky on this channel with our lineup of exceptional guests. We're joined by MMTA graduate and analyst of the grain markets, author of the MMA Grain Report, Wyatt Fellows. Wyatt, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Gianni. How are you?
Good. It's great to have you on, and thank you for joining me.
Yeah, likewise. This is good to have a returning trip.
Indeed. So we're going to talk about what's going on across the entire financial landscape today, review the geocosmics that happened last week. It wasn't really all that exciting from a geocosmic standpoint. We had Mars ingress into Virgo on the 10th of July and Mercury ingress into Leo on the 11th. But looking ahead to next week, we have quite the lineup of geocosmic activity in a very intense period and critical reversal date period. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and look at some charts here, starting off with the Dow Jones Industrial Average. You know, the Dow here, we just opened up in the market here, testing resistance of this inverted head and shoulders formation that we've been talking about for quite some time. Now, some caution is advised, I think, in the Dow because the Dow has not made a new high in this last week, while the S&P and the NASDAQ have. So it's, to me, this is a bullish setup, but Wyatt, what's your take on what's going on in the stock market? Obviously, we had a pretty strong week this past week.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely bullish, but like you said, that one fly in the ointment is the Dow not making a new high, but everything else has. I'd say if it does, then it looks pretty good. It looks bullish.
Well, I agree. And, you know, so the big headline from an economic standpoint this past week was the lower than expected inflation report. We had the lowest CPI reading since March 2021, I believe, the lowest one in 2 years. The producer price index, the PPI, was up just 0.1% in June. So disinflation seems to be the trend, and the NASDAQ has really been liking this. We're seeing the NASDAQ continue to lead the market higher. This is bullish. So any take on that arbitrage opportunity between the NASDAQ and the Dow? Do you think one is, perhaps on sale relative to the other?
Well, I mean, if things are going to be bullish, then I mean, the Dow should catch up, I would think, if it's truly bullish. But
yeah,
yet to be seen.
Yep, indeed. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 10-year yield on the Treasury. We had a pretty big sell-off in yields, meaning that bonds rebounded pretty nicely this past week. We know that over the last couple of years, the trend has been lower, and now with inflation coming down, bonds are starting to see a little bit of relief. But I think there's signs brewing, and we'll talk about this when we get to grains in a moment here, Wyatt, that this whole idea that inflation is over may not be entirely the case right now. So what's your take on what's going on in with respect to inflation and the bond market right now?
Well, bonds are in a time band for a primary cycle low, aren't they? Are they not?
Well, I think we just had a primary cycle low last week.
Yeah, so I mean, we should. I would think that we should have some kind of reaction higher, 2 to 5 weeks at least, which is interesting because we're coming right into Venus retrograde period, which I mean, that's interest rate sensitive currencies.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Wyatt, because it's not just Venus retrograde that we have next week that's going to impact interest rates in bond markets. We have Sun trine Neptune and Mars opposite Saturn on the 20th next week, and then we have Sun opposite Pluto on the 21st. Now, Pluto rules debt, Saturn rules structure and foundations, and we know that bonds are the foundation of the economic system. So, everyone's cheerleading this inflation stuff. Let's actually pivot over to the dollar. I'm going to pull up the euro here because the euro breaking out against the dollar. Now, with Venus going retrograde and all these interest rate sensitive aspects coming up, it makes me wonder, could we get a surprise over the next couple of weeks, given Venus retrograde's tendency to see shifts in monetary policy. Right now, the markets are pricing in one more rate hike and done. But, if this breakdown of the dollar leads to, another bid in commodities, could we perhaps see a shift in inflation expectations over the next couple months?
Yes, we could. It's interesting to note, though, that there is a Fed meeting last week in July, right during Venus retrograde. So who knows? And you can't dismiss the fact that the dollar is basically crashing into this time frame.
Yeah.
Primary cycle low probably there, and a primary cycle top in the euro potentially. But you got to be aware that we are coming down into a big geocosmic period.
Well, I pull up the Swiss franc here too, because, big move in the Swiss franc this past week. The dollar fell to its lowest level against the Swiss franc since January 2015, which, if you recall, that's when their peg to the euro broke way back when. So major leg lower here in the dollar against the Swiss franc. So let's go ahead and take a look at crude oil. And then we'll look at some of these grains. So crude oil, nice bid to wrap up the week here. We obviously don't have Friday's bar yet, but let's pull up USO, the ETF, a little bit of selling here in the morning. But overall, a very constructive week for crude oil. And I know this is a market you follow pretty closely, Wyatt, because, diesel tends to be a pretty important component of your business. So what's going on, within the energy market from your end?
As far as I'm concerned, the time to price your fuel was back in the spring, or late spring, May timeframe. That's when the lowest prices we saw. But now they've come up substantially. Diesel, gasoline, other things like that. Fertilizer, is actually it's quite reasonable, quite respectable right now. But we'll see. It's almost a fire sale, especially on anhydrous right now.
Interesting. Well, let's go ahead and talk about some of these grains. We'll start off with corn. And, one of the big things you talk about fertilizer, I'm glad to hear that because we know fertilizer comes from a lot of natural gas derivatives, right? Ammonia and whatnot. And with Saturn being in the sign of Pisces, we have to be cognizant of the potential for shortages with fertilizer. But that doesn't seem to be unfolding this time around. But Saturn and Pisces, again, shortages in a water sign. There has been drought in large parts of the Midwest. So what are the drought conditions in your parts of the Midwest? I know in my part of the Midwest, we've seen some improvements over the last couple of weeks with respect to rainfall, and how might that be impacting the grain market right now?
So we've been real dry here in my area, but south, say Chicago, the latitude line, Chicago south seems to have been catching some nice rains over the last few weeks through the Midwest. And it's indicative. You get a chart of the corn market there. Corn is made in July. I mean, that's the month that's made in, and so you can see why we've caught rains. We should have good pollination. It's interesting, there we've got a slight new low with divergence on the RSI indicator, and this is the 8th week. So major cycle low is due here for corn.
Very good. And as I think of corn, the planet that rules corn is Venus, and Venus going retrograde in the sign of Leo. Leo is the peak summer season, rules drought, rules heat. It's been pretty warm. I mean, here in Michigan, it's not been the hottest summer I've ever experienced, but I know, in other parts of the world, there's been a heat wave. So I think that's something to keep in mind, the potential for drought. The combination of Venus retrograding in Leo and Saturn in Pisces, I think, leaves the door open for, perhaps some issues with precipitation going forward. What about wheat, Wyatt? What do you think on this one? We didn't make a new low in wheat. So what's your take on this grain?
Well, in wheat there, in my monthly report, I think that was a 12-month low right there. Problem for wheat is we're so late in the long-term cycles, the 9-year cycle. It just, I don't foresee us having a lot of traction. We're going to rally a little bit probably with the other grains. My opinion is soybeans are going to lead if we are going to rally this summer. You brought up Venus retrograde in the Leo sign. I'm actually using a 1983 analog for grains right now. That's where Mars, Venus are in the same point in the sky.
Oh, wow.
As we were in 1983, and 1983 was an exceptionally hot summer late in the year. So we also have a hard aspect between Mars and Saturn occurring.
Yeah.
And we had a square in 1983 with Mars.
Wow.
So things are lining up to August could be warm. I mean, we'll get there and see, but I'm kind of thinking soybeans are going to be the market that explode because they're an August crop. They if they're going to go, that's the market that's going to go.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Wyatt. And for anyone watching, Wyatt is going to be doing a presentation on long and intermediate term forecasts on soybeans this Sunday, July 16th, for the MMA mid-year webinar. So if you want to know all the details for what Wyatt is looking at, I would highly encourage that you come check it out. We'll also have Matthew Kaiser presenting copper, myself for T-notes, the euro, and crude oil, and of course Ray for stocks, metals, and cryptocurrencies. So Wyatt, let's take a look at gold, because gold had a big move last week as well, or this week. It's Friday here today, but nice rally, even bigger move in silver. Looking at GDX here, the gold miner ETF, we do cover this in the monthly ETF report that's going to be published next Wednesday, July 19th. So what's your take on metals? Pretty good, I think, and it seems to be liking the drop in the dollar.
Yeah, definitely. I think this week's action solidifies the primary cycle lows that occurred there late June, especially silver taking out the last swing high. I know gold today is knocking on that 45-day moving average. Be nice to see it poke through there, but you got to like it.
Yeah. And last but certainly not least, let's take a look at Bitcoin here, because we're trying to break out here. I'm a little cautious with this potential breakout with Venus retrograde upcoming, but are the crypto markets something that you follow at all?
No, I got to be honest with you. I might be the last guy on earth.
So you prefer the classical Venus markets and the grains instead of the new Venus markets and the crypto?
Yes, that's true. But I mean, it's interesting. Your chart there, it looks like you got some divergence there with three highs and 3 higher lows on the RSI there.
Well, that's exactly a really good point. If we don't decisively break out by this weekend or by early next week, going into Venus retrograde, I think it's a very dangerous setup. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But otherwise, I think we can get a nice sharp rally over the next couple weeks here. So Wyatt, that's all the time that we have for today. So thank you so much for joining me. We'll definitely have you back. And again, we'll see you on Sunday, July 16th. Couple of brief announcements. Again, we do have the webinar on the 16th. We will have the monthly Shanghai report published on Monday, the 17th. And then on Wednesday, the 19th of July, we're going to have the monthly ETF report published. And Wyatt, can you tell us when your grains report will be published next? It's going to be toward the end of the month, correct?
Yeah, it should be the last week in July.
Okay, very good. So any final words, Wyatt, before we reconvene on Sunday?
No, other than I really hope it keeps raining here in the Midwest, to be honest with you.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you everyone so much for watching. You can check out all of our work at www.mmacycles.com. Academy courses, we have reports, and many other things. So the leaders in financial astrology, always a pleasure to do a video with you. Wyatt, we'll see you next time.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jen.